DreAllDay.com.
You are now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there even when the success you've expected to achieve is yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all of this together into one bundle, one package, one mindset, one method, one philosophy, one book, one show, one daily masterclass, all under one umbrella that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic, actually we're gonna do a two-part series here on how to be a critical thinker, or actually we'll just call it critical thinking. Today we're gonna talk about how to be a critical thinker, and then tomorrow we're gonna talk on signs that someone is thinking critically. So these are sister episodes that we're gonna put together here today and tomorrow. This critical thinking thing is an important topic because, especially with the world that we're in today, I just told you in episode 1474, not just told you, a year ago, I told you to stop watching the news because the news used to give you all the information as to what was going on, doesn't do that anymore. The media, all of media, traditional media, news media, social media, only gives you the headlines. It picks and chooses what parts of information it wants to share with you, or what it wants you to know about, or basically what energy it wants to create within you. So you can't really trust traditional media or new media anymore either. So anything that is presented to you, you have to have the critical thinking skills to be able to look at it and say to yourself, okay, you have to have the critical thinking skills to look at it and know what questions to ask of yourself. Know what questions to ask of the person or entity that is presenting the information. To know when an entity may be leaving out certain information because they want you to have a certain idea or they want to stir a certain emotion within you, or know when whoever is presenting news or information to you, quote unquote news or quote unquote information to you, maybe they're putting something in or only telling you a certain part of it, or they're making something sound a certain way because they want you to come to a certain conclusion. But if you don't have critical thinking skills, you won't notice these things. The people who work for news companies, whether that's a online publication, a traditional publication, news networks, people who write for a living, people who make videos and content and podcasts, even people like myself for a living, they are smart individuals. They know that if they want you to feel a certain way about a story, they can take a neutral story and make it sound a certain way that's going to induce a certain feeling in you because they know how you're already feeling up to that point. So this is why critical thinking skills matter so much, so that you know when people are trying to persuade you one direction or another. So you know when someone is trying to get you to come to a certain conclusion because they have a vested interest in other people besides themselves having that same conclusion. This is why critical thinking matters so much. You got to know what questions to ask. I told you not too long ago, I did a whole episode on this, that these days is not about having all the answers, it's about asking the right questions. That's the biggest thing these days. And this was in episode 1494. I told you about asking the right question. Episode 1741, why asking the right question is more important than the answer. A lot of times in life people have answers, but they're asking the wrong question, so it doesn't matter that you answered the question. So critical thinking goes hand in hand with that very idea. So if you haven't listened to episode 1741, then I would suggest you go do that as soon as this one is over. But listen to this one and tomorrow's episode first. Let me define before we get into the points, is the definition of critical thinking comes from the website study.com. Quote, critical thinking means making reasoned judgments that are logical and well thought out. It is a way of thinking in which you don't simply accept all arguments and conclusions that you are exposed to, but rather have an attitude involving questioning such arguments and conclusions. It requires wanting to see what evidence is involved to support a particular argument or conclusion. People who use critical thinking are those ones who say things such as, quote, how do you know that? Is this conclusion based on evidence or gut feelings, close quote? And, quote, are there alternative possibilities when given new piece of information, close quote? This is what critical thinking is. I'm out of the definition now, everybody. Notice the things that they emphasize here. Wanting to see evidence to support an argument or conclusion. When I give you here on this show, when I tell you, hey, I'm giving you my opinion and my perspective on this, but let me tell you why I have this perspective. Let me explain to you the counter. Let me explain to you how people are looking at it this way, but why I'm looking at it this way. I try to give you more than one side of what I'm saying, even though I am very clear on where I stand, so that you can understand how I thought about and how I came to what I came to. And not simply accepting all arguments and conclusions, but asking questions over and over again, asking questions and wanting to see the evidence behind things, and making sure that you know when you're being presented something that's based on actual evidence or something that's based on emotion. And it's okay if someone has an idea based on emotion, but as long as you know that it's based on emotion and not based on evidence, you understand what the game is. Aristotle was the person who said, it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. That's what critical thinking is about, is that you can look at something, you can play around with it in your mind, toss it around in your mind, understand maybe why some people come to a certain conclusion while at the same time you don't come to that conclusion. And I know a lot of people who are very devoid of critical thinking skills. Good people, smart people, but they don't have critical thinking skills because they are unable to hold a thought in their mind or even entertain a thought with which they do not necessarily agree. So I want to make sure you don't have that problem. So that's why we're doing this 2-part series on critical thinking. Let's get it right into it. Point number 1, the topic once again is how to be a critical thinker. Number 1, curiosity. This is the biggest thing. Critical thinkers are naturally inquisitive. They're the type of people who are always asking how and why questions. How do you know this? Why is this the situation? Critical thinkers get various sides of a situation and look at things from multiple angles before forming a conclusion. When you hear someone going really hard on one side of an argument, it is your job to ask, not necessarily of that person, but of yourself, ask, what's the inverse of this person's point of view? This person is trashing Black Lives Matter, as I did yesterday. All right, what's the inverse? What does someone say who is in love with Black Lives Matter? What would they say? Critical thinkers ask questions almost to a fault. Critical thinkers are the type of people who, any of you as a kid, or maybe if you have kids, you were the person who your parents or adults around you would get annoyed with you because you were always asking them why. Every time they told you something, you would ask, well, why is that? Or why is that? Or how do you know that? Or where is this? You were always asking more and more questions to the point that people get annoyed with you because you don't just accept their conclusions. All right, don't be, any of you who is a parent or a teacher, or you're around young people who are a lot younger than you, on a consistent basis and you get annoyed, don't get annoyed with them when they ask you a whole bunch of questions. Now, I can't stop you from getting annoyed, but don't shut them down. Let me offer that. Do not shut them down. Maybe send them to a different resource, send them to the internet, let them go find out, send them to somebody else who can answer their questions, but do not tamp down that natural inquisitiveness, because people who are naturally inquisitive are critical thinkers. They become critical thinkers. People who are not naturally inquisitive will end up many times, not every time, but many times end up just accepting what is presented to them, even though it may be based on some bullshit. Okay, so this is why critical thinking matters so much. Critical thinkers are all asking questions to a fault. People will, even as adults, people get mad at critical thinkers because critical thinkers ask too many questions when everyone else has already accepted what they've been told. Let me say that one again. This is a good sign of a critical thinker. They're the type of person who is they're still asking questions after everyone else has already accepted the conclusion that they've been given. A good school or a good teacher in a school will teach their students to ask questions rather than teaching their students to blindly accept whatever the teacher said. A good teacher will encourage a student and will encourage the students to challenge the teacher on what they said, and will engage with you when you do. How many times have you heard me say here on the show, listen, send me a text. I forgot to mention my text at the beginning of this episode. My number is 305-384-6894. Send me a text and tell me, what'd you think of what I said here today? What'd you learn from what I said here today? Do you have a disagreement with something that I said? You have a question about something that I said? Something that I said that you find objectionable or you just know is absolutely wrong? Tell me what it is. A good teacher will always encourage their students to engage with them in debate. Challenge me on what I said. If you think I said something that is wrong, tell me what it is and tell me why. And make sure you have some evidence behind what you're saying to stand on it. Make sure you have some logic behind it, not just an emotional argument. I said that to you just yesterday, day before. Don't come to me with an emotional argument in the feminine energy. Come to me with masculine energy. Doesn't mean you have to be a man. Comes to me with masculine energy, meaning you have it based on something you can stand on, something tangible, something solid. Not just, well, no, I feel this way. How you feel doesn't matter. We're talking about, well, how you feel does matter, but not in this sense. What I'm saying here is how you feel is the emotion, but what's real, what you can prove, what you can back up, what you can argue and offer evidence behind, that's what I'm talking about. And a good teacher will teach you to do this and they'll encourage you to do it. A bad teacher will say, well, I said it, so that's just what it is. Or you can't have a different opinion from me because you may be wrong. And this doesn't have to be in school. This could be anywhere. Any person in a position of authority should be encouraging you to ask question after question after question. Point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is how to be a critical thinker. Number 2, critical thinkers are natural skeptics. They have natural skepticism. And what that means is not that just when everybody says something to you, you automatically start thinking that they must be wrong. That doesn't necessarily make you a critical thinker. That could just make you annoying. But when you do hear some information from somebody, you can accept it. You can entertain the idea, as Aristotle said. You don't have to accept it. You can accept that you heard them say it, entertain it in your mind, but then what you do is you go get that same information, but go get it from a different source. Go get a different perspective on that same story, on that same news item. And then find out, all right, well, why does this person say it this way, but then this person, the exact same situation, they're looking at it a completely different way. Why are they talking about it like it's terrible and this person talking about it like it's great? This person saying everything's going positively, and this person saying everything's going terribly. Why do they have such conflicting ideas? And your job as the critical thinker is to find out what are the different perspectives and why do these different perspectives exist. This is what a critical thinker does. They are naturally skeptic. They do not natural skeptical. They do not just accept what one source offers them and just think that that must be the truth. They know that that's usually not the case. One mind-opening situation for me when it came to me making sure that I had to check myself on my own critical thinking skills happened in 2016 when there was a presidential election. You might remember it. I had been properly indoctrinated up to the point of that election. And I remember it that an election of Donald Trump meant that we were going to have the American version of the Holocaust for black people and Latins and the LGBTQ community if Donald Trump won. Now, Donald Trump was basically Hitler, and he was going to everything was just going to be really terrible for all minorities in America if he won. There would be Jim Crow laws all over again. So there's no way that he can win, no way we can let him win. It's all a joke that he's even running. We can't let this guy win. And then he ended up winning, which we all know. When he won, this is the question that I asked myself. I remember that day because I remember I went to the gym. The election's on a Tuesday. So I went to the gym that Wednesday morning, and I remember just thinking in my mind, just processing the fact that he won and thinking to myself, wait, how is it possible that he won? Because he's going to bring back Jim Crow. Is going to be terrible for all black people, all Latins, all LGBTQ. Anyone who's a minority is going to be terrible for all of them. It's going to be terrible for women. How is that possible? Now, I understand that maybe he had some supporters, but at the same time, could all of those people be racist? Could all of those people be bigots? Could all of those people be against minorities? So many that over half the country actually voted for this guy. How is that possible? That's what I was thinking in my mind, because the only way he won was at least half of the people who voted for him. So how is that possible? Knowing what I know, given this information I've been indoctrinated with, that means all of them had to know this and they supported it anyway. How is that? That's what I was turning over in my head that morning. I remember as I went to the gym, and I said, there's no way that half of the people in the country are all racist. Now, there are probably some racists out there, but half the people in the country are transphobic and homophobic and anti-women. Half the people in the country, how is half of them? I said, there's no way that could possibly be. So because I was skeptical of my own conclusion, I said, all right, I got to get some more information because this obviously must be something that I don't know, because there's no way that many people could be supporting this idea. So I went and got some more information. I started listening to and reading people who thought differently, listening to and reading people who actually were in support of the election of Trump, but not because they were racist, not because they were transphobic and homophobic, not because they were bigots. They just had a different way of looking at things. And what I realized was, number one, that okay, maybe he wasn't about to bring in the next Holocaust. Maybe he is not Adolf Hitler. Maybe he's not as much of a bigot as the news had me thinking he was. And what I realized was that the news, quote unquote, had been sensationalizing everything they said about Trump for their own personal purposes that had nothing to do with informing people. The purpose was Trump had trashed the traditional media so much, the mainstream media, that they had decided to start trashing him back. So they basically started throwing mud at him and making everything that he did and said seem 10 times worse than it actually was, because they were getting back at him for trashing them. So they were basically playing a game of tit for tat with Trump. I didn't realize it until after the election. I said, wait a minute. All right, so they're just making things seem this way because they don't like this guy, not because this is what actually is going on. They weren't being objective anymore. I realized that is what was happening, and we, the consumers, we were the ones being caught in the crossfire. Again, what they were doing had nothing to do with the consumers. It had everything to do with how they felt personally as an organization, let's say the media, about him and how he felt about them. They were basically going at each other, and the consumers just got caught in the crossfire. So we were the ones being played while they were basically trying to get at each other. And I realized that I was the one who was the dummy because I'd been believing the news. That the news wasn't actually informing anymore. They were just giving me the version that they wanted me to know about. Now, I would still pay attention to what the news was saying, but I wasn't buying it anymore. Again, as Aristotle said, you can entertain an idea, but you don't have to accept it. So I realized that I had been given some bad information. I had been thinking something that I thought was truth, that I thought was basically evidence and fact, given that it came from a reliable source, being the news. But as I told you in episode 1474, we can't listen to the news anymore because their game changed. And at the same time, I had to change my own game because of my critical thinking skills. Instead of me saying, okay, the only reason Trump won is because half the country is racist. That's a ridiculous idea. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't add up. And because I knew that didn't add up, I started asking myself questions. I became inquisitive. Wait, how is it possible that this is happening and then he ended up winning? That doesn't make any sense. And because I asked those questions, I sought out more information. I was skeptical about my own conclusions because something happened that kind of gave me a red pill that I had to swallow. And because I got skeptical about that red pill, I said, all right, obviously there's something that I don't know. There's obviously something that I wasn't paying attention to. And then when I started getting more information, I realized that I was the dummy who had been getting played. That is what critical thinkers do. They're skeptical of the things that they are thinking in their own minds, especially when reality smacks them across the face and says, okay, well, obviously what you were thinking ain't what it actually is. Point number 3. Today's topic, once again, is how to be a critical thinker. Third thing you need to be a critical thinker is you need a strong dose of humility. Yes, humility helps you be a critical thinker. Now, I told you about humility in episode 1415, competence of a teacher with the humility of a student. Episode 1307, having the humility to earn your confidence. And episode 445, humility, how to use it and who to watch out for when it comes to humility. What does it mean when it comes to, how does humility work regarding critical thinking? It means you are open to changing your mind when you discover that you had the wrong belief or the wrong idea. A person with a good dose of humility and who is a critical thinker, well, let me reverse that. A person who is a critical thinker has the humility to change their mind when they realize that maybe they had the wrong information, or maybe when they just get new information that challenges how they thought before. Let me offer a news flash to everyone. Nobody is always right. I'm wrong sometimes, you're wrong sometimes. No matter how smart someone is or how educated or how popular or well-known or well-received the person is, nobody is always right. While we all have our own beliefs, your number of unchanging beliefs should be a very small number. Now, you should only have a handful of beliefs that you are not willing to change. What I will say, I'll go on the record in saying this, every opinion that I have today is subject to change pending new knowledge, new experiences, and new perspectives. Every opinion that I have. Even things that I've gone on the record and said here on this show, if I get a different opinion, I'll make a new episode and clarify, hey, I got a new opinion now. I said that in this episode, but now I'm saying this. Why? Because I got new information. Every opinion I have is flexible. I told you about this in episode number 734. Keep all your opinions flexible. That's the name of the episode. So make sure that you be confident in how you present yourself and confident in what you say, but at the same time, keep it in your mind. You know what? I'm willing to change this opinion if I hear something new. Now, what we don't see too much of in this world, even though I know there are a lot of critical thinkers out there who have the humility to change their opinions, is that when someone goes on a record with an opinion and it ends up being incorrect, very rarely do you see that same person come back out and say, you know what, I had this opinion, I was wrong, now I changed my mind, now I'm saying this because of this new information that I got. Very rarely do you hear anyone publicly just admit that they are changing their thoughts and admitting that they were incorrect because they just didn't know what they didn't know, or because maybe they weren't incorrect, but they just changed the way they look at things because they got a new experience. Very rarely do people just come out and say that publicly because so many of us feel like we have to stick to our guns with something that we originally said for whatever reason. Nobody's always right. And episode 734, again, keeping all your opinions flexible. If, for example, LeBron James goes back and he doesn't lose all the times that he lost in the NBA Finals, and I'm willing to change my opinion that he might be better than Michael Jordan. LOL. All right, that was just a joke. I used to think that I needed to eat all of my food when I was eating. I remember I would be eating a meal and I know I was full. My body was already telling me that I don't want any more, but I still had a few more spoonfuls on my plate. So I would force myself to eat that food because I had been raised and indoctrinated with the idea that any food you have on your plate, you have to eat it. Why? Because there are kids starving in China and people starving in Africa. So since you have food on your plate, you must eat it all. And it wasn't until I was a grown man and someone opened my eyes and said to me, well, you eating those last couple spoonfuls of food is not going to feed anybody in China and it's not going to cure hunger in Africa. So why do you need to eat it? It was a new perspective. And because I got that new perspective, I was humble enough to change the way I thought about things. And now when I'm done eating, I'm done eating. If that means a little bit of food gets thrown in the trash, then damn it, the food gets thrown in the trash. Have the humility to change your way of looking at things when you hear or learn or see something new. All that said, tomorrow, again, we're going to go into some more signs of, or we're going to go into the signs of being a critical thinker. Let me recap today's class, which is how to be a critical thinker. Definition, I'll read again from study.com. Quote, critical thinking means making reasoned judgments that are logical and well thought out. It is a way of thinking in which you don't simply accept all arguments and conclusions you are exposed to, but rather have an attitude involving questioning such arguments and conclusions. It requires wanting to see what evidence is involved to support a particular argument or conclusion. People who use critical thinking are the ones who say things such as, how do you know that? Is this conclusion based on evidence or gut feelings? Or are there alternative possibilities when given new pieces of information? Close quote. Aristotle said it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting that thought. Point number one, critical thinkers are curious. Naturally inquisitive, they ask why a lot, they get various sides before they form a conclusion. When you hear someone going really hard on one side of an argument, it is your job, critical thinker, to ask what is the inverse? What is someone who thinks the exact opposite of them thinking? Critical thinkers ask questions to a fault, and a good teacher will engage you and encourage you to be a critical thinker. They want you to question them, not just accept everything that they say. Critical thinkers do not accept anything. Point number two, skepticism. Critical thinkers get news from a variety of sources and perspectives. One mind-opening situation for me, I told you about in 2016. I thought things were one way. I found out they were another way. I got skeptical about my own ideas, and I found out that there was a whole different set of ideas and beliefs and perspectives out there that I had not been privy to. I'm privy to them now. So I realized that I was a dummy, and I had to start looking at things differently and being more skeptical about the information I was receiving, which led to episode 1474, stop listening to the news because they don't tell you the truth anymore. Point number three, critical thinkers are humble. They are open to changing their minds when they discover they had an incorrect belief or an incorrect idea, and or they come across new information or new perspectives that change the way that they look at something. It's not that they were necessarily wrong. They just look at things differently because they have a different perspective now. I talked about this in episode 734. Keep your opinions flexible. Someone opened my eyes as an adult and said, you don't have to eat all the food on your plate because it's not going to feed anybody who is starving. Unless you're going to take that plate and give it to that person, they get to eat it, you ain't eating it. You eating food does not feed a starving person in Africa, so you don't have to eat all your food. Even though I had been raised with that belief and idea and took it all the way into my adult years, I changed my thinking because I was humble enough to open my mind, or keep my mind open, and humble enough to change my mind when I got new information. All critical thinkers are willing to do this. Tomorrow, I'm going to give you signs of being a critical thinker. Send me a text. Tell me the most valuable insight you got from today's masterclass. My number is 305-384-6894. Once again, 305-384-6894. Work on your game. Dre all day.